In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Veni Sancte Spiritus, repletuorum cora fidelium, et tui amoris igneis ignem accende, emite spiritum tuum et creabuntur.
Et renovavis faciem Te.
Oremus Deus corde fidelium, Sancti Spiritus illustratione docuvisti, da nobis in iodem spiritu recta sapere, et eius per consolatione godere, per Christum Dominum nostrum.
Amen.
Sede sapientiae,
Ora pro
omni
nobis.
Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. So, talked about the fideists, traditionalists. So there's no reason to be too concerned with that. It sort of died out, that traditionalism and fideism really is not around anymore. So if you look at page 622, the Vatican Council defined the same Holy Mother Church holds and teaches that God, the beginning and end of all things, can be known with certainty from the things that were created through the natural light of human reason. But it pleased his wisdom and goodness to reveal himself and the eternal decrees of his will in another and supernatural way. It is ascribed to this divine revelation that such truths among things divine that of themselves are not beyond human reason can, even in the present condition of mankind, be known by everyone with facility, with firm certitude, and with no admixture of error. It is, however, not for this reason that revelation is to be called absolutely necessary, but because God in his infinite goodness ordained man to a supernatural end, namely to share in the good things of God that utterly exceed the intelligence of the human mind. So the idea is that, yes, we can reason to the existence of God and to many of his attributes, but God also revealed those things because it is easier for us to know them through revelation than to deduce them, because some people are so stupid, frankly. I mean, and it's not I'm not talking about simple people. I'm talking about people who are well educated. They're so stupid that they can't figure that out because they have a block and they don't want God to exist. So they believe that something can come from nothing. So human beings are easily deceived. Even Aristotle didn't quite make it to where St. Thomas made it. I mean, he had some idea of the prime mover and all, but a personal prime mover, so it's easy to know that God exists, but to deduce with clarity, you might say, all of that pertains to the existence of God and its attributes are not available to everybody with clarity, you might say. So that's why they were revealed. Likewise, see the canon corresponding to this. If anyone says that the one true God, our Creator and Lord, cannot be known with certainty by the natural light of human reason through the things that are created, let him be anathema. So that defends the possibility of proving the existence of God. From this solemn definition, we have three propositions which are explained in the Preconciliar Relatio. Revelation of the natural truths of religion is not absolutely necessary, for reason can by itself alone, and we said this, on the basis of created things, certainly know the existence of God, the principle and end of all things. So somebody who is an atheist through his own fault. It is to a matter, and that's, against Bergoglio, who say they go to heaven. You cannot be an atheist and in good conscience. That's not possible. It is to a matter to be held on divine faith that reason can do this on account of its physical potency that is in due proportion to its object. All right, so from created things, you reason to a creator. And it is closely connected to faith, proximum fide, that reason can prove the existence of God even in accord with man's moral potency, that is, without any great difficulty, for sacred scripture declares that those who do not know God are foolish, mad, and inexcusable. See, so we can know God and his attributes through reason. Moreover, theologians commonly deny the possibility of invincible ignorance or error about the existence of God, the author of nature. So the idea that atheists go to heaven is just, well, what do we say about it? Thus, traditionalism and fideism are heresies inasmuch as they deny the possibility of demonstrating by reason alone the existence of God on the basis of our knowledge of created things. The same must be said of Kantianism and positivism, which is just another form of Kantianism. The revelation of the natural truths of religion is morally necessary, that is, maximally useful, so that all may easily and with firm certitude and with no admixture of error know not only certain natural truths of religion, for example, the existence of God, but also the sum of the natural truths of religion. So everything, all of his attributes, etc. The council speaks of this sum or collection of truths when it says such truths among things divine that of themselves are not beyond human reason. While all of these truths taken together do not exceed reason's physical potency, they do exceed its moral potency, for reason is encumbered by many impediments to attaining perfect knowledge concerning such matters. All right, so it makes it easy to know what could be achieved by reason, but in many cases you have to achieve all of the natural truths of religion, you have to study something like this or the Summa, or so the average person who doesn't read or write may not be able to get there. The revelation of supernatural mysteries is simpliciter or strictly necessary, supposing the gratuitous ordination of man to the supernatural end. Right. Rational defense of the Church's doctrine concerning the befittingness and necessity of revelation. So concerning Trinity and other doctrines of grace, redemption, etc., those things must be revealed. You cannot reason to those things. That's against the semi-rationalists. So revelation is indeed morally necessary so that men may know certain natural truths about God. Revelation is the full array, complexus, of the natural truths of religion, of those things, is morally necessary. In other words, that you know everything perfectly. Revelation of supernatural mysteries is hypothetically, though strictly, necessary. We'll see all this. A persuasive argument can be made for the befittingness of the gratuitous ordering of mankind to the supernatural end. See, so God was not obliged to order us to a supernatural end. A doubt whether in the state of pure nature, that is before original sin, the revelation, and even before, apart from sanctifying grace. In other words, if man were created only in his pure nature without any sanctifying grace, that's what that means, state of pure nature. Did you do De Deo Creatoria? No, you did. You did. Well, then you know what that means, state of pure nature. Okay. The revelation of the full array of natural truths of religion would have been morally necessary, and resolution of objections. So we'll look at each of these things. Revelation is indeed morally necessary so that men may know certain natural truths about God. In order to understand this proposition as well as the following ones, we must recall the philosophical definition and division of necessity. So necessity can be absolute, founded on intrinsic causes. So it is absolutely necessary that the billiard ball hit the other billiard ball right in order that it go into the pocket. You see, so no, that's not a good example. Intrinsic causes would be from formal and material. So something is intrinsically and absolutely necessary if it pertains to form or matter of the thing, right? Hypothetical, it corresponds to the extrinsic causes. Strict, to which physical impotency corresponds, so as opposed to moral impotency. So you are physically incapable of swimming to Europe. All right, it's 3,000 miles of ocean. That's physically impossible. All right, so so you would say you have that's physical impotency. It's you have a moral impotency of walking from here to California. You could do it, but it's morally impossible in the sense that, or say for an 80-year-old lady to get to church when there's a foot of snow out. That might even be physically impossible. But if something is extremely difficult, and that could vary according to people. You know, you have where it is intrinsically intrinsically possible but very difficult. Then you have moral impossibility. See, so, but then physical is that it's just not possible according to physical causes. You cannot fly by flapping your arms. See, that's physically impossible. Don't try it. Jump off the roof. Let's see, but and so moral impossibility could vary from person to person, and that's true in moral theology. In other words, when people have moral impossibility to accomplish the law of one type or other, this is pretty common. And from the agent necessity of coercion. See, so there is if somebody twists your arm and tells you to walk, see, or puts a gun to your head or something like that, that's a coercion. That causes a necessity. Indeed, taking up Aristotle's doctrine and perfecting it, St. Thomas says, necessity is said in many ways, for that which cannot be is necessary. Now, this can belong to something in one way from an intrinsic principle, either a material one, as when we say that everything composed of contraries must be corrupted. In other words, if you have a composition of things that really don't want to be there, they are going to be separated eventually. That's why you die. All right, because your things in your body are composed, and you have very, very, I say, sophisticated composition in your body. They want to go home. See, they don't want to stay together. There are certain compositions that are very stable, like water. And basically, you have to know chemistry for that. But the other compositions are fragile. See, so there's a tendency to pull apart. That's what it means. See, so they are at least corruptible. So only the elements like oxygen, hydrogen, iron, gold, silver, those are the elements. Those are stable because there's no composition. Something I found out, I never knew, that silver, just like gold, does not tarnish. The reason why silver tarnishes is that it's normally alloyed with something else, but pure 0.999 silver never tarnishes. I never knew that. Learn something new every day. Here I got to this. I thought only gold did that, but no, silver does it too. But typically, for some reason or other, silver is put in with some other zinc or something else. I forget what it is, but that does tarnish. And that's why you polish it all the time. But if you notice, the silver chalices that come back are 0.999 silver, and you don't have to do anything to those. I noticed those do not tarnish, but they're very bright. See, the other silver is sort of slightly gray, and that's because it has something in it. But anyway, or a formal principle is when we say that a triangle necessarily has 3 angles which are equal to 2 right ones. See, so it would not be a triangle unless it had that property. So that's its form. See, so that's necessary. This kind of necessity is natural and absolute. In another manner, it can belong to something which cannot be on account of something extrinsic, either its end or efficient cause. So those are the 2 extrinsic causes, the end or the efficient cause. Regarding the end, this is akin to how someone cannot attain a given end or cannot attain it well without this given thing, as food is necessary for life and a horse for a journey. Okay, that's when horses were necessary. Well, I guess if you're Amish, you would say that. So this is called necessity of the end. That's why you need an airplane or a boat to get to Europe, which is sometimes called utility. However, on the part of the agent, necessity belongs to something when someone is forced by another agent so that he cannot act in a contrary manner. This is called necessity of coercion. Hence, absolute necessity is founded on a thing's intrinsic principles, and it corresponds to metaphysical or mathematical impossibility. I'm sure, metaphysical impossibility means impossibility from the very point of view of its essence. See, something is metaphysically impossible, like a square circle is metaphysically impossible. For example, a triangle must have 3 angles that are equal to 2 right angles, and man must be a rational animal. If he's not rational, it's not possible that a man not be rational, at least in principle. In other words, his brain may not be working, because your brain has to work in order for you to function rationally. So, but you are still rational. In other words, if you're a human being, you're rational in principle. If somebody could fix your brain, then you would be fine. You make some jokes about that. Hypothetical necessity is founded on extrinsic causes. If it depends on an extrinsic agent, it is called necessity of coercion and corresponds to physical, not metaphysical impossibility. See, so someone locks you in a room and you can't go to mass. See, that's coercion. For example, it is physically necessary that flesh burn under the influence of fire. See, that's physical causes. However, it is founded on the end. If it is founded on the end and it is strict, then it also at least corresponds to physical impossibility. For example, it is physically impossible to live without food. So it pertains to the end. And so you must achieve that end, otherwise you die. However, if there is not strict necessity, but only the greatest usefulness for achieving an end, it is called moral necessity, and corresponds to moral impossibility, which is none other than great difficulty that is de facto insuperable according to the ordinary conditions of life, such as swimming to Europe. No, that's even physical. Moral would be getting to Mass when there's a snowstorm. With this terminology in place, our first proposition is proven as follows. The first principles of reason are naturally known without a teaching office coming from tradition. See, so you don't need somebody to tell you the first principles of reason. That's what that means. Now, on the basis of these principles, natural reason is easily led to the knowledge of the existence of God, the first cause, and the supreme lawgiver, because something doesn't come from nothing. Therefore, without the aid of revelation, human reason can likewise know certain natural truths about God. The major premise is clear. Just as sight naturally and immediately knows its formal object, namely color, so too the intellect naturally and immediately knows its formal and adequate object. Adequate means everything that it can attain. Yeah, formal would be the essences of things, you see. But it has an adequate object. That means it through the formal object, it is able to attain many other things. That's the adequate object. Namely, being and those things that essentially belong to being precisely as such. Our knowledge of the first principles, such as the fact that we cannot affirm and deny the same thing of the same subject, and other such principles, is founded on this knowledge of being. See that? That's the summa contra gentiles. So, as I said, with every intuition of being, the first principles are coming into your head with them. In other words, it's just automatic. So no one has to tell you that, a cow cannot be a non-cow at the same time. Nobody has to tell you that. Therefore, these principles are not acquired through a human teaching office, but rather, as Aristotle says, all teaching in every discipline is brought about from pre-existing knowledge. That means it's all based on the first principles of reason. That is, it presupposes natural knowledge of the first principles. Not from the teaching of a master, but from the impulse of nature do all men desire to know. That's why you have media, information, looking at your computer, looking at your iPad, looking at your phone. See people doing it all the time. There is a deep, deep desire for information and knowledge. The intellect is a very, very hungry faculty. And that's why there's entertainment. People get on the plane, they put on because otherwise they're bored. The intellect is, the airplane doesn't give a lot of opportunity for knowledge. You just sit and look at, there's nothing really very interesting out the window either, usually. And you're just staring, so your intellect is dreadfully bored. It's one of the unpleasant things about flying. It's dreadfully boring. So, because your intellect it never is satisfied. You eat a meal and, you're satisfied for a while, but your intellect is never, ever satisfied. So it's always hungry for something. So, and because that's why people listen to music, though, and even rock music. And because science is knowledge through causes, there is in us a natural desire to know the cause when we know its effects. See, so why did that happen? See, why did the accident happen? The terrible accident on the freeway or something, or a plane crashes. How did that happen? Why? It's the first question. You don't just dumbly look at it. Well, it fell out of the sky. Everybody wants to know why. And therefore, prior to any teaching, children express their questions. What is the cause of this? Why is this so? Why is the sky blue? I don't even know why the sky is blue, but there is a reason. But from a natural impulse, they will continue to ask questions until they receive a response expressing an identity between the predicate and the subject. As they have to be satisfied with that. Let's see. Indeed, one asks why man is wise, not why wisdom is wisdom. See, because if the kid says to you, "What is wisdom?" and you say, "Well, it's wisdom," that's a tautology. It means you're not saying anything about the predicate, the subject. See, but why man is wise is not tautological. Likewise, one asks why man exists, not why existence itself exists. This is all very good for converting atheists and agnostics. All of this stuff you're reading here, and you will have to do that. So you know where to go for review when you need to talk to these people. This is all very good. These analyses like this. Sometimes you meet people on the plane. I don't believe in God. You can make some progress. You'll spend a lot of time on airplanes. The minor premise, however, receives a lengthy proof in philosophy. Excuse me. From the principle of causality, everything that comes about has a cause. Everything that occurs. The very idea of occurrence means that it didn't exist before, and now it exists. That's an occurrence. And from the things that indeed do come about, common sense, that is natural reason, easily arrives at a knowledge of some cause that never came into being and is being from itself, ens a se. Otherwise, you have a processus in infinitum, just as if you had an infinite number of dominoes, and they will never fall one upon the other unless somebody pushes the first one. An infinite number of them would not account for all the dominoes falling. See, so an infinite recession of causes would not account for this cause. Do you see that? De Deo Uno? You'll see that in De Deo Uno. All right. The processus in infinitum does not account for existence of a contingent thing, something that receives existence from something else. So just think of an infinite number of dominoes. If somebody doesn't push the first one, that's not going to do anything for those dominoes. They're just going to stand there. So, and that's common sense. See? Likewise, from a consideration of the order found in the world, it is led to knowledge of the supreme governor. See, so order demands government. See, chance is by its very nature haphazard. Really, nothing happens by chance because everything has a sufficient cause. It's just that you don't know what the sufficient cause is, and you say it happened by chance. But even when you pick a lottery number, all of the causes necessary for you to have your hand on that particular one came together, and I just won $1 billion. By chance. No, it wasn't by chance. Whatever causes needed to come together between you and that little slip that gives you the whatever it is, however you do it, they're all causes that have concurred to that point. You see, you just don't know what they are, and that's why you say it happened by chance. Like car accidents don't happen by chance. Somebody was just killed the other day on near Norristown on the 422 that goes to King of Prussia from a deer crossing. That can happen because if the deer is big enough, you hit him and he'll come up on your windshield and come right through your windshield. Because, they would probably weigh, a big deer would weigh maybe 200 pounds easily, I would say. And that's a lot of weight, and especially if you're going fast. You're just going to, and so the guy died. Now, did that happen by chance? No, because the deer, all of the causes causing the deer to be on that freeway at that time and the car at that time came together. And people would say, oh, that happened by chance. It didn't happen by chance at all. There's no such thing as luck, and there's no such thing as chance in the real order. It's chance is what we call an ens per occidens, which means the accident is that you didn't see the two causes coming together, or even the many causes coming together. So order involves government. I mean, the sun rises predictably every day down to the second. And so the moons, all of the movements of the moon are predictable to the second. The various other movements of the universe. I mean, everything goes around the way it should, and just the Earth. Imagine if the oxygen on the face of the Earth were not constant. That when you got off the plane in Paris or something, that we're having low oxygen today, and you're huffing and puffing, or there's too much oxygen. You get a little high when there's too much oxygen. So you get off in another place and you start. Think about it. The whole Earth has constant oxygen. In other words, the air is right in the entire Earth. That demands order, and order demands government. You see, as I always say, when you're a teenager and you leave your room a mess in the morning and you come back at the end of the day and everything's perfect, do you say, well, the wind must have blown and folded all my clothes and made my bed, and look at this, everything's dusted and in the right place, that's what happened. Right. If you thought that, somebody would say you're crazy, you're really insane, you're out of your mind. And the order of the universe is a far greater order than that. That is more believable than to say that there's no government of the universe. That's far more believable that the wind did that. So anyway, so you are necessarily led to the idea of a supreme governor. Similarly, from the precept of conscience and from moral obligation, whose strength is superior to circumstances of place and time, individual, society, and so forth, natural reason rises up to the knowledge of the supreme lawgiver. So, we have laws, we have courts, we have prisons, we have capital punishment. That involves some principles that are immaterial, such as justice, for example. The animals don't have those things. So you must rise to a supreme lawgiver then. Inasmuch as moral obligation, which has its proximate foundation in the principles of our reason, requires a supreme foundation in God. There is no law without a legislator. And therefore, just as theologians commonly do not admit that there is invincible ignorance concerning the first principles of the natural law, so too they do not admit that there is such ignorance regarding God's existence. See, the first principle of the natural law is we must do good and avoid evil. That you cannot be ignorant of. But what is good and what is evil requires a supreme lawgiver. Ultimately. Look at the footnote. See St. Thomas's commentary in Romans 1:21. Then ignorance excuses from sin when it thus proceeds and causes a sin without that ignorance itself having been caused by sin. Notice that. See, so the ignorance is the cause of the sin, without that ignorance itself having been caused by sin. So, in other words, that's the difference between inculpable ignorance and culpable ignorance. Just as when someone, having employed all due diligence, strikes his father thinking that he strikes a foe. So there was a case of that at Oyster Bay. That's where the SSPV has its place in Long Island. There was a woman who thought that there was an intruder. She came out of her bedroom and shot him, and it was her husband. It was at night. He wasn't expected, etc. You know, there were all sorts of circumstances like that. And she thought there was an intruder, and she had to go to court to prove that, you know, because, you know, the first suspect when a man or a wife dies is the hubby or the wifey, right? And so she had to go to court, and she was exonerated. Famous case in Long Island. Shot her husband. But you see, that's that would be inculpable ignorance, or so it seems. But if the ignorance is caused by a sin, such ignorance cannot excuse the subsequent sin. Therefore, so, for example, in the case I always give of a doctor who says, I don't know which leg is supposed to come off, but I'll take this one. That's culpable ignorance, and therefore he's not excused. Therefore, St. Paul first proposes what he intends by saying, thus, what is known of God is in them, such that they may be inexcusable, that is, such that they could not be excused on account of their ignorance. See, so he doesn't excuse the Gentiles for their ignorance of at least the natural truths of religion, worshiping idols and stuff like that, which is ridiculous. So, however, back to the main text, however, other naturally knowable attributes of God do fall into oblivion or are corrupted, as are the secondary principles of the natural law. So the primary principles, and you would study this in actually moral theology, the primary principles are known to everybody. We must do good and avoid evil, etc. There's a few others. But the secondary ones, such as, for example, whether fornication is evil or not, may not be known necessarily. So that's why in the pagan world, fornication was considered to be either not a sin or, you know, venial sin. You know, nothing important. See, the pagan world. That's why the Jews wanted nothing to do with the pagans. And you know, St. Paul in his epistle to the Corinthians and Romans rails against all of that immorality, you know, because it was just normal, it was just life, and that's pretty much true today. It's so the secondary laws of the natural law are not necessarily available to everybody. Similarly, natural reason is naturally certain about the existence of the free choice of the will and responsibility, even though Luther denied that. Indeed, immediately upon deliberation, our natural intellectual insight perceives, at least vaguely, the absolute disproportion existing between the universal good, specifying the will, and the particular good about which it is deliberating. For example, robbing a bank. See, it would be nice to have money, so I'll rob the bank. Now, in other words, you're comparing some particular good to a general good you shouldn't steal. Hence, man naturally knows that he holds lordship over his acts and is certain about his dominating indifference concerning particular goods. In other words, that he has freedom. That's the basis of all freedom, is indifference to the object. So
in other words, that you could take it or leave it. See, that's the basis of all freedom of the will, is indifference of the object. So you're not free with regard to the good. The will is fixed on the good. See, so everything that you decide to do has to have at least an aspect of good. Otherwise, the will cannot move. Just as the intellect is fixed on being, the will is fixed on the good. So there has to be some aspect of good about it. Even though you might say, well, there's an aspect of evil. In other words, I'm disobeying the law, but I like money, so I'll rob the bank. Okay, but you're indifferent to that end, and then you elect. See? Hence, man naturally knows that he holds lordship over his acts and is certain about his dominating indifference, that's what that means, concerning particular goods, even if he does not know how to formulate a demonstration proving the existence of free choice of the will. You learn that in philosophy. Nor how to resolve the objections registered against it by determinists. See, determinists would say you are just the product of your emotions, and you're not really responsible for what you do. So, people who they try to excuse people who were raised badly or something like that, and that they did not know what they were doing because they were raised by terrible parents. So it's just not true. Likewise, we have a kind of natural certitude concerning the immortality of the soul, for St. Thomas says, the intellect differs from the senses inasmuch as it grasps being, esse, not only as limited to here and now, but rather being, esse, absolutely and according to all time. So your intellect is able to abstract the very notion of being from everything that exists. That's what that means. Whence everything having an intellect naturally desires to exist forever. However, on the basis of such a desire, we do not know what conditions of the future life might be. So there's a natural desire to live forever because of the immateriality of the soul. It has no principle of corruption. Philosophical reason explains and defends these first certitudes of natural reason through a scientific reduction to the first principles, that is, through a resolution to being. However, common sense, that is, natural reason, spontaneously and in a vague manner resolves its certitudes to being precisely because being is its formal object, just as color is the formal object of sight. So even you don't need to be a philosopher, in other words, to figure out being, that even an average person could know what is meant by being and versus non-being. And therefore, revelation is indeed not morally necessary in order for men to know certain natural truths about God. Hence, the fideist Bottin had to subscribe to this proposition. However weak and obscure reason became through original sin, there remained in it sufficient clarity and power to guide us with certitude to the existence of God, to the revelation made to the Jews by Moses, and to Christians by our adorable man God. Right. Number 2, revelation of the full array of natural truths of religion is morally necessary. This revelation is not strictly or simpliciter necessary, for on its own our reason is not physically unable to know all the natural truths of religion. Indeed, these truths do not exceed the natural objective medium of our intellect. So we are able to attain them, and we can arrive at knowledge of them through knowledge of sensible things. All right. Nonetheless, revelation of the full array of natural truths of religion is morally necessary for firm, easy, and errorless knowledge of all these speculative and practical truths collectively. So the whole gamut, you might say, of religious truth is difficult to attain, and therefore it is morally necessary that all of it be revealed. Right. Nonetheless, revelation of the full array. Okay, we said that. This is proven as follows. Something is morally necessary when we cannot de facto overcome a great difficulty in the ordinary conditions of our life without having that morally necessary thing, such as an airplane or a boat, or a car or something else to get to California, even though you could walk. Now, without revelation, in the ordinary conditions of our life, men cannot de facto overcome the difficulties involved in knowing the sum of the natural truths of religion firmly and without error. Therefore, to this end, the revelation of these truths is morally necessary. So, the major premise is the definition of moral necessity, which we know. The minor premise is proven by St. Thomas in 3 ways, taken up by the First Vatican Council, because the truth discovered by God by reason would be arrived at only by few after a long time and mixed together with errors. Just as the Greeks, who were very intelligent people, they got some things right and they got some things wrong. Nevertheless, man's entire salvation, which is found in God, depends upon knowledge of such truth. The Holy Doctor unfolds this threefold reasoning in greater detail. Man must accept by way of faith not only those things that are above reason, but also which can be known through reason, doing so for 3 reasons. First, indeed, in order that man may more quickly arrive at the knowledge of divine truth, for the science to which the proof of God's existence belongs, as well as other such things, is the last thing proposed to man in his investigations. The first thing he knows is material things, basic material things like food and whatnot. In order to get to God as first principle, etc., you have to do a lot of thinking. So, in other words, it's not easily available necessarily to people who might be primitive or crude in some way. So given that it presupposes many other sciences, and thus man would arrive at the knowledge of God only after much of his life had passed. Second, he must do so in order for knowledge of God to be something held more widely, for many cannot undertake scientific study, either for lack of mental abilities or on account of other occupations and necessities falling to our temporal life, or even on account of laziness in learning. Who cares? All such people would be entirely cheated of the knowledge of God if divine things were not proposed to them after the manner of faith. Third, he must do so on account of certitude, for human reason is very deficient when it comes to divine matters. A sign of this can be seen in the fact that the philosophers who, through their natural investigations, have deeply looked into human things, have fallen into many errors and mutual contradictions. Therefore, in order for men to have knowledge of God that is free of doubt and error, it was necessary that divine things be handed on to them by way of faith, as though they were said by God, who cannot deceive. All right. I go to number 1 there, confirmation based on the history of philosophy. All philosophers who did not acknowledge or accept revelation, indeed even the greatest among them, committed grave errors concerning God, his distinction from the world, his providence, his foreknowledge, the freedom of God and man, the spirituality of the soul, and the future life. In the Greeks, who greatly cultivated philosophy, we first find the polytheism, which was fought against by Xenophanes,
and the first philosophers like the Ionians, Heraclitus and Democritus, were materialists. Parmenides and the Pythagoreans, along with Anaxagoras, posited certain principles of spiritualism, but did so imperfectly with the admixture of grave errors. After a long time, namely after 200 years of speculation among this people, who were endowed with great speculative gifts, there appeared with Socrates the true method of the perennial philosophy, although with its essential lineaments, which Plato developed and Aristotle composed into a scientific system, though not without a number of errors regarding providence and free creation properly so called, nor did these philosophers firmly assert the immortality of the soul. As regards morals, Plato commended the idea of sharing wives, nay, also exposing of infants if they were deformed. Likewise, Aristotle made excuses for the wanton images of the gods depicted in the temples. However, immediately after Aristotle, Greek philosophy fell anew into materialism with the Epicureans and Stoics, or into skepticism with the Pyrrhonists. Neoplatonic philosophy imitated Christianity, though doing so while denying the freedom of creation, teaching the pantheistic emanation of things from God and explaining evil through matter. So even the best of human intellects erred a great deal, despite whatever truths they did discover, they erred a great deal. So we'll quit there. Today is Father Bear's birthday. So good. You may not see the value of this now, but you'll see the value of it later. Did I give you in De Ecclesia the study guide? The whole study guide is 40-some pages. Did I give you that or not?
Yes, sir. Give us up to